Welcome to Two Wheels. Now, as you can see, this thing behind me says 16. That's because it's just recorded me running at 16 mile an hour, which is as fast as I can possibly go wearing my leathers. But how much quicker could I go if I were on a very powerful motorbike? And how much quicker than that could I go if I were on a very powerful motorbike with a turbo or a supercharger on it? This week on the show, it's time for some speed, while Fran will be doing something that's probably a little bit slower, and as always, our head-to-head will also be coming up.
Speed is a drug and a major reason for most of us being into bikes. The very act of riding a motorcycle flat out will flood your brain with pleasure-triggering endorphins, and it will also turn your adrenal gland right up off the scale. Obviously, it won't do this for everyone. The less speed inclined may find the experience unpleasant or perhaps even downright terrifying. But if you're into bikes, chances are you've got a hankering for speed in there somewhere. In order to investigate the subject of speed more thoroughly, we've come here to Bruntingthorpe Proving Ground in Leicestershire with some seriously fast bikes, which will be running flat out purely in the interest of science. Now, on the one hand, Bruntingthorpe is a pretty dismal looking disused airfield, littered with ranks of cars in storage and the carcasses of assorted aircraft. On the other hand, its 2 mile runway means it's also the perfect place to max out anything fast. So, what have we got here today? Well, representing your everyday modern superbike, we got this GSXR 750. At 168 kilos and 125 brake horsepower at the back wheel, it should be good for at least 170 mile an hour on a good day. Now this could be very interesting because Gary here has popped over to help us out with a couple of things. Has never maxed his bike out before. Obviously, being here at Bruntingthorpe Proving Ground, he thought he'd take the liberty of a couple of runs. He's just done his first ever top speed run on his GSXR 600. Now, let's see how it affects him first time. Well, how was it?
Absolutely awesome.
Is your heart still going?
Yeah, I feel sick.
How fast?
166.
Is that the most you've seen on that clock?
That is the most it's ever done. It's probably the most it'll ever do, I think. Oh, that was absolutely mind-blowing.
Did you ever think that going in just a straight line as quick as you could would be as much fun as that?
No. I mean, I've done fast speeds in other airfields, perhaps, little ones, but
no 2 mile straight like
no.
this.
And you just keep hammering it, and it goes 164, 165, 166, 165, 164. Oh, it's just absolutely superb. I'm exhausted.
We'll let you get out again then.
Cheers then. Thanks.
Well, there you go. That's what speed will do for you, if you didn't believe me.
We're a sceptical lot as Brits. We're renowned for not taking things at face value, and it's exactly the same with our bikes. Just because Mr. Supersport's manufacturer claims 140 horses at the flick of a wrist doesn't mean that power will be there out on your favourite track when you most want it to be. What? I hear you cry? My bike's not as powerful as I thought? Well, yes, your bike may not be as powerful as you thought, but fear not. Two Wheels help is at hand once again. And with most things, there is a solution to the problem. A dyno. A what-o? A dyno, a machine that will accurately measure the power of your two-wheeled toy. So we've come here to Dynojet UK of Preston to see how the dyno really works, why you'd want to try it, and most importantly, to find out your bike's true power potential. But first, we need to find someone who knows a thing or two about the subject, so come with me. So we're joined now by Frank, and what Frank doesn't know about dynos isn't worth knowing. Isn't that right, Frank?
That's right, Fran.
So, Frank, what are all these dynos about then?
Basically, a dyno is short for dynamometer, and the kind of motorcycle dynos that we manufacture are what we call chassis dynamometers, where we can put the whole motorcycle onto the dyno. We can then test the performance, i.e. the horsepower and the torque that the bike is producing. This is very helpful for the average motorcyclist or anybody interested in the performance of motorcycles, because it can tell them exactly how the bike is performing. For example, if somebody fits an aftermarket exhaust or a jet kit or a power commander or an end can, and they have concerns how things running, we can look at the horsepower, we can look at the torque, we can look at the air-fuel ratio, we can look at all these things that will help the end user understand more about his motorcycle.
Well, call me naive, but I didn't know that. That's fantastic. So how do they actually work then? How do you get the power from the bike to the computer?
Well, why don't we go to the dyno room and let's find out. Okay, Fran. First of all, we wheel the bike onto the dyno, and then we secure it with a strap on the front wheel to make sure that it's secure, it won't cause us any problems. We have to make sure that the rear wheel is in the centre of the drum. We can move the carriage backwards or forwards accordingly to make sure that it is absolutely over the centre line of the drum. We place a side strap on both sides of the bike, again to give it added security. We place a sample tube in the exhaust pipe that sucks the exhaust gases out of the exhaust pipe, which we pass over a 5-wire wide-band lambda sensor, which will then tell us the air-fuel ratio. We place an exhaust extractor over the rear of the exhaust. This takes away all the exhaust fumes and keeps a nice environment for us to work in. We need to connect a inductive pickup to the low tension wire here just underneath the tank. We need to place the control pendant on top of the bike so that we can actually drive the dyno whilst doing the test. We then need to connect up the power commander to the computer through the USB port here. And finally, we're just going to have a look in the tank and make sure there's enough fuel to conduct the test with.
Okay, well that's it for part 1, but join us in part 2 when we'll be testing Frank's dynos to the limit.
Jack Frost is another chap whose quiet demeanour belies his speed cravings. As well as having set a 2-wheeled land speed record in the past, and with years of road racing behind him, Jack's company has spawned more turbocharged mutants than you can shake a stick at.
So then, Jack, what records have you actually managed to take with your turbo boosters?
I hold the outright UK land speed record.
And how fast is that?
I've done 222.9 is the official record.
And that's a genuine speed,
That's
not
genuine
a speedo.
speed, average of 2 runs both directions.
Right.
And one way I've done quite a bit more than that.
And how did that feel, over 200 mile an hour, on your own bike?
More when you have to shut off the airfield. You know, in this country we don't have too long airfields, and when you go past the last final trap, the last speed trap, you know then it's really quick. It's hard to judge the speed because the airfield's so wide. It's not like being on the road, but when you shut off and you know how long it's took you to stop, you know you've been going pretty quick. And
have you ever been in a situation where you've been looking like running off the end of a runway?
yeah.
But you're still here now, so obviously it went okay.
Yeah, it went okay. I won't bring that one up.
So what is it about speed that does it for you? What makes you make these bikes and try for the records?
It's the old speed and power and as much performance as you can get out of a bike or a car or whatever it may be for anybody. The more you get into it, the more you want. And it's just an adrenaline rush of doing it at the time and everything. Would you say you would ever get bored of more speed? No, never. No, I don't think anyone can.
Why is it you use these bikes?
Just that it's the most powerful, fastest, standard bike, and obviously for tuning, it's a good base for tuning and making even faster.
Yeah. And your route seems to have been to go down the turbo route.
Yeah.
What started you on that path?
I've always had a lot of turbo bikes over many years. Back in the late 80s, I had turbo bikes from back then, and it's just the route I've always gone.
Now, this bike looks very standard.
Yeah.
At a glance, this is an ordinary Hayabusa.
Yeah.
But underneath these fairing panels, we're looking at what, some 300 horsepower?
Just a little bit more, just around 320 this one.
At the back wheel?
Yeah.
Okay, now this is one of your customers' bikes that he's kindly lent you today.
Yeah.
Do you want to just tell us a bit about the spec? What's different to a standard bike on this?
Basically the engine, the rest of this other than the brakes have been uprated, but the rest of the chassis is totally standard. And the rest of it's just all the engine, the turbo parts, and that's that.
Well, I guess we'll see how it goes when we get it on the strip.
Yeah.
So that's the hardware covered. Now it's time to see how it all stacks up on the strip. But it's not just a question of cranking the throttle right open and hanging on. Oh no. Getting a bike to go fast is one thing, but maxing one out is another matter altogether, and it requires a surprising amount of thought, finesse and technique. And the least aerodynamic part of any bike is invariably the rider. So when it comes to top speed runs, you'll need to make yourself as small as possible, crunching right down behind the fairing and squeezing as much of yourself as you can out of the airflow. So with your knee sliders removed, they're worth at least a mile an hour on their own, your chin on the tank so you can barely see, and your knees and elbows almost under your chin, you then need to cane the bike through each gear, taking care to change up the instant you pass peak power in each ratio until you finally find yourself in top. Now squeeze in some more, and as your hands are pretty much redundant, you can pull them up the bars a bit and behind the screen a little more. And for the final flourish, push right back in the seat, now hold it just there until you're through the timing lights.
Well, that's it for part 1, but coming up in part 2, Fran will be doing her thing as only Fran can, and we'll be bringing you our head-to-head.
Welcome back to Dyno Heaven. In part 1 we enlisted the help of Frank, who told us about the dynos, what they do and how they work. Well, enough of the talk already, we want to see one in action.
Okay, Fran, now we're going to do the actual dyno testing where we measure the horsepower. We're going to do this by accelerating the bike in 4th gear from a low RPM up towards a rev limiter, which will give us a horsepower against RPM figure. On the screen you can see we have here miles an hour, RPM. We're also measuring the air-fuel ratio in real time and a history of it. We're also measuring the humidity, the air pressure and the temperature, which will give us a corrected horsepower figure to today's weather conditions. Basically, Fran, there's two basic ways of measuring the horsepower. On this dyno we can do an acceleration test in 1 gear, normally 4th or 5th gear, which will give us a horsepower figure against RPM or speed, or we can actually ride the bike through the gears, which will give us what we call an all gear test. The 4th gear roll-on test gives us the opportunity to look at the power against the RPM, and if we want to run it through the gears, we can obviously see the power in each gear and see if we have any problems in the higher gears or any transmissional losses or things that actually may be happening when the bike's been ridden on the road. But 9 times out of 10 we would just look at the 4th gear or 5th gear roll-on to give us the horsepower and the air fuel reading that we require. Well, Fran, that's insight into motorcycle dynamometers and what use they are to your average motorcyclist. I hope you had a nice day.
Do you know what? I've had an absolutely fantastic time and I've learnt loads. I will never look at a dyno in the same way again. Thanks, Frank. See you later.
Each week we take 2 bikes, 100 bikers, and from their feedback, we determine a winner.
Aprilia's Tuono is quite an affordable way of getting your grubby little mitts on a Millet engine and frame without all that fairing to worry about. Basically, the Tuono is a stripped-down Millet with tons of attitude and all the ability to back it up. Power delivery is smooth and gutsy with plenty of torque out of that big V-twin, while those wide bars make it very easy to manoeuvre, and the engine means you can pile out of corners hard indeed. Millet's chassis gives the Tuono fine handling, but take it easy with that throttle or the front wheel will be coming up to greet you. The Z1000 pinches its engine from the ZX9R and it's been retuned slightly, shoved into a rather more basic frame. All this means the Z1000 doesn't really get going until higher up in the tacho, but even so lower down there's plenty of easy power delivery to play with. And that frame does help the handling plenty, although don't expect loads and loads of ground clearance. Kawasaki weighs in at 198 kilos, which isn't bad for 1000 cc's, and also helps make it good and stable at speed. Tuono's looks are questionable. Some think it's the biking equivalent of Kylie in a bikini, others think it's plain old pig ugly. But whichever way you cut it, that small nose cone is surprisingly effective at keeping the wind off your head. And that lack of fairing also allows you to have a good squint at that big 60-degree V-twin motor, and the exposed framework gives people a lot to pore over in the pub car park. But the Z1000 has to win this contest hands down. It's got smouldering bad boy good looks with those twin pipes either side, brutish big shoulders, and even in bright green or vivid orange, this bike covers it off. And that bikini cowl even looks like the bike's scowling at you. All in all, it's a real head turner with plenty of attitude. Both bikes are pretty good here, but I'd have to say on reliability front, the Z1000 is most likely to take the honours. That engine comes out the ZX9R, it's detuned, and it is a Japanese motorcycle. You can expect to ride it and forget it. To Ono, however, they are getting better and better, but expect to be able to lavish some care on this to keep it in top nick. All I'm talking about here is proper servicing.
When I first clapped eyes on the Z1000, I'll have to say I absolutely fell for it. I think it's a wicked looking bike, really aggressive and really retro. It's got the ZX9R engine in it, retuned for lots of mid-range. It's a Kawasaki, so the front end is really well planted, good taut chassis, and it's a Japanese bike, so it's just going to run forever. So yeah, I do like the Z1000.
The Aprilia 2 Ono, gorgeous big V-twin bike. It shares the same frame and the same engine as the Millie. When you want to ride it slowly, it's very comfortable. When you want to ride it quick, it's, boy is it quick. The Japanese counterparts don't suffer, arguably, from the same reliability issues as the Italian V-twins do. But if you want to be noticed, then the Tuono is the bike for you.
Decisions, decisions, decisions. The Urban Gorilla Kawasaki or the Naked Universal Street Fighter Aprilia. The decision is yours. When it comes to speed testing, there's no way you can rely on your speedo, as they're all at least 10% out by the time you're over 150 miles an hour. What you really need is a bona fide speed trap that doesn't lie. Well, we've got some proper timing gear with us here today, and Robin Hutton is the man at the helm. So then, Robin, we've got a whole load of timing gear here today. But before we go into that, why can't people just rely on the speedos on their bikes to tell them exactly how fast they're going at high speed?
In a perfect world, I'm sure they could, but the average speedometer, whether it be motorcycle or car, reads at least 10% fast, in some cases more. There are the odd exception in which the speedometer is true, but it's very rare.
So really, with a production bike, you're saying there's a 10 to 20% inaccuracy. You think you're doing 180 mile an hour on the speedo, you're really doing, what, 165?
Yeah. Absolutely right.
Okay, obviously you'd have a lot of experience in this, having timed a lot of bikes.
Yes, yes. And we get a lot of feedback from people saying, but we were going much faster than that, and they jolly well weren't.
Because you know they weren't.
I know they weren't, yes.
Because how accurate is the timing equipment you've brought down with you today?
It is certainly accurate to within 1 mile an hour at 100 miles an hour. Yeah. And the inaccuracy doesn't grow as we go faster.
Right, so we're talking 1 mile an hour error.
Yep.
Maximum.
Yep.
Okay, and the kit here, just basically, how does it work? Is it light beams or?
Yep, we have a light beam set at a predetermined distance apart on the track. The machine here, the clock, times that distance, the length of time the vehicle takes to go through that beam, and converts it automatically to speed.
And then we have a final figure.
And we have a final figure which comes up on the dial here, or in this case on the display down the road.
Now, in your time speed testing, Robin, you have also officiated at a lot of record attempts, haven't you?
I have indeed, yes. Almost every one for the last 10 years.
Right, and so you're a timekeeper for any world record attempts or British record attempts, you could do those?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
And what is the fastest thing that you have ever timed?
The fastest thing I've ever timed was Richard Fallows in his jet car at 300.3 miles an hour average through the quarter mile. For a motorcycle, it's Jack Frost, who's here. I think it stands at 222.
Which is a hell of a lot.
It's a lot. It is a lot.
Now, do you think we're going to see any records here today with these boys?
Unfortunately, we can get a pointer to what they may do in the future, but as the governing bodies are not represented here today, there won't be any official records.
Well, official or not, let's see what happens. Well, that's the most that this'll do. But what could we do with another 550 cc's and about another 150 odd horsepower? Let's find out. With good conditions and a nice clear runway, Jack was out first on his whole shot turbo Hayabusa, and flying through the timing lights, he managed 200 mile an hour. Up next came Richard on his supercharged bike, and he was a little concerned that perhaps the parts weren't quite bedded in yet, but even so, he still went very, very fast indeed, as you can see. But I couldn't possibly leave without having a blast on this pair of mad creations, so despite knocking knees and quivering hands, I took them both for a couple of circuits around the track and down the strip.
Well, judging back where he rode mine, and I think he was a bit scared of it, to be honest. He backed off, I think, but...
Well, what can I say? I'm actually fairly despondent. I've only done 195 mile an hour and Jack's done 200 on this. But the funniest thing, the strangest feeling, is that there is so much power on here, you don't feel like you're trying at all. In fact, from the time we crested the rise, I was backing the throttle off slightly so as not to use too much of the power, because this bike is still on road gearing. As it was, I had it on the limiter or thereabouts in top gear. Taking it any further might have blown it up, but even so, I would love those last 5 miles an hour.